second scripture is from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 29, verses 11 through 14. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and places where I have banished you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile. I have been blessed to hear Mr. Stimac's testimony before, and I know that you're going to be blessed in hearing it today. For those of you who don't know Mr. Stimac, I'd like to give you a glimpse as to how I got to know this man. Mike came into my life during my darkest days, both personally and professionally. Personally, my husband and I had been separated, and professionally, I had had a falling out with my former principal. My co-workers and I were struggling at school every day to stay positive, and we were at an all-time low. Our careers felt like they were in the dumps. And I can remember praying at that time for a new leader, someone who would come into our school and make it the positive place that it used to be. When I heard that Mr. Stimac had been hired as our new principal, I was really excited, not because I knew Mike, but because I knew his mom. And so I knew that he came from a good family. I knew his mom, I knew his relatives, and I had had some of his cousins in my class that I had taught in years. I didn't have Mike as a student, but my very first year of teaching in second grade, he was a second grade student. And because Sugar Creek is such a small school, I knew who he was, but I didn't have a chance to be his teacher. Before he officially started as our principal, he took time off from his job to just come down to Sugar Creek and visit with us. He popped into our classrooms to say hi to the kids and to say hi to us. So I was already impressed with him before he ever became officially my boss. At our very first faculty meeting with him as principal, he said a lot of really, really important things, which I can't remember. But what I do remember is his sincerity and his openness with us. During that first meeting, he introduced himself and he said, "I'm a Christian." And I was dumbfounded that he included this in his opening remarks to his new staff. He then went on to give us just a brief version of how he came back to Sugar Creek. So the testimony that you're going to hear today, we were given a brief version of it during our very first faculty meeting. I was moved to tears as he spoke that day. It was and still is the very best faculty meeting I've ever been to. After that meeting, I walked up to Mike with tears in my eyes and I said, "You might think that I'm crazy, but I believe that you are an answer to my prayers. I prayed for a new leader, and here you are." I knew that God had heard and answered my prayers in a very big way. Since that day, Mr. Stimac has blessed my life and the lives of every teacher and student at Sugar Creek Elementary. And I could go on and on and on and tell you all the wonderful things that he did at Sugar Creek, but I would need more than just the 5 minutes that I'm allowed. So I won't tell you those things. But I will tell you that in 27 years of teaching, and I'm now on my 11th principal, he is the only principal that I ever asked to pray for me, and for my husband, and for my children, and for our school. He is the only principal who looked me right in the eyes and said, "Kim, I'm praying for you." And he's the only principal that I offered to pray for every single day. And that's special because you don't always get that at your workplace. So he blessed my life as a co-worker, as a leader, and as a friend. So it's my honor and privilege to welcome my former boss and my forever friend, Mr. Mike Stimac, to the pulpit today to share his testimony. I know that you're going to be blessed by what he has to share.
Thanks for that. You've already started my emotions, so, I was thinking this morning when I woke up, after I'm done here, I have to go to Pastor Mark's church because he asked me to speak there. So I assume he and Pete are on the same vacation together. And this morning I thought to myself, why couldn't those guys cut me some slack and join services so I didn't have to cry in front of a bunch of people 2 times? But hey, they're the bosses. What Kim said about my coming back to this area is definitely part of my testimony, and I'm going to get to that at some point. And I'm not going to steal too much of your time today because I woke up with a terrible sinus issue. My dad had to go to the hospital today, so it didn't start off on the right note. And plus, my thoughts have been totally scattered about what to write and what to share with you today. So I really kind of put the thoughts that I've had over the past week and a half together this morning. They've been in my head. I organized some key ideas on my phone the other night, but I finally put pen to paper this morning, and I still don't know that it's going to totally justify the walk that I've had with God and my reasons for coming back here, and just ultimately my faith in God. But I was really struggling with what it means to share a testimony, what is a testimony, and why it's important. And like I said, I'm not overly excited to share with you, although I am a very emotional person. I'm a very open person, as Kim said. I cry a lot in front of people, and I have no shame in doing that. I try to tell kids at school all the time, especially guys, there's no shame in crying and wearing your emotions on your sleeve. But when I woke up this morning, my mom called me at 6:10 to say that I needed to come down and help her get my dad in the car so he could go to the hospital. And my mouth was totally dry because I was sleeping with my mouth open because I couldn't breathe through my nose. So it was just a bad morning to start. And on top of that, I'm still having flashbacks to last night's homecoming dance. The way kids dance today and the music that they listen to, more power to you parents who have kids at the high school. I don't know when they started dancing like that. But in spite of my reluctance to speak about my faith, I do realize that it's an opportunity to grow closer to God and to share some vulnerability with people that I might not know so well. And also, I think this is probably the most important part, and that's to find faith, more faith than I already have, that I can accomplish the things that I feel God has laid before me to accomplish, and to develop more faith each and every day that He can heal my dad. So, I guess in my eyes, this is my chance to share my journey with God. And like I said, I struggled to find the thoughts and the words until my mom, the other day, gave me a little piece of paper. Something that I typed up when I was about 12 years old, when Pastor Frank Sapp was my pastor, and I was going through confirmation classes with Frank and Claire. And it's titled, Why I Want to Follow Jesus. And I think this really answers the journey that I've had throughout the course of my life. And I'll read it to you. And after I read it the first time the other day, I was really disappointed in myself at 12 years old as a former English teacher that my writing wasn't as good as I thought it was when I was 12. I made a lot of mistakes. But I'm going to read to you what I wrote when I was 12, because I think it fits directly into the testimony I'm going to share with you today. The reason I want to follow Jesus is because my parents do, and because I want to have Him in my life. Jesus guarantees eternal life with Him, and that is what I want. He comes first before everything in my life, which is a point that I'll get to here shortly. I'm very happy to have Him in my life, and reading His Word will bring me closer to Him. Jesus makes me wholeheartedly willing and ready to live for Him. When I ask for forgiveness of my sins, it's because He died for mine and yours. Many of my friends who don't have the Lord and Savior in their life go through things that aren't meant for their lives, like doing drugs and drinking. And you can really tell that they do not have Him in their life yet. Confirmation has really helped me to follow Jesus. Going every Thursday, I have learned that the only way to have eternal life is to seek grace, and this year was really the year that I started to follow Him. Having Him in my life right now is great because I know I could die at any time, but in the physical form, not in the spiritual. So when it comes time for me to pass on, I will be in heaven with my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. So I wrote that when I was 12, and I think it has carried over directly a lot of those points into, I think, how I live today. So when I think back when I was 12 years old, I reflect on how absolutely true those words are, and how, as a kid, my biggest Christian role models were my parents. And I'll start with my mom, because I think Kim basically was excited that I came back because my mom was such a great Christian role model. She didn't really know me. But my mom was my biggest role model because she read her Bible every day. She prayed with my brother and me before school every morning. That God would help us to serve other people. And she always role modeled the right things, particularly her service to other people. I've never met anyone with the heart of a servant like my mom. Needless to say, following Jesus was an easy decision for me when I was 12 because I saw it every day. When I was 12, I can't really even think of a time, except for the confirmation ceremony, that I just said that I followed Jesus. I felt like I always followed him because of what my parents role modeled for me. So it was, like I said, a real easy decision. So throughout my elementary, teen, and high school years, I still followed in the footsteps of my parents. I prayed every day. I read my Bible from time to time. I went to church begrudgingly at times. But even though I followed Jesus, or said that I did, I don't know that I can say that I was all in for Jesus, like some of the kids I know today are. Kids who aren't afraid to put their faith on display in schools, like Aaron and the Ites. Kids who are not afraid to pass out bracelets showing their faith in God, to pass them out to their peers and to adults, and to ask other people to follow Jesus because they do. I was too afraid, unlike those kids. I was afraid of what my peers would say about me when I was in high school. I had a similar experience in college. I still followed Jesus. I feel as though I modeled some Christ-like behaviors and a Christ-like attitude, but at the same time, I feel like I was complacent in my walk. Because like I was in high school, I was still a bit worried about what my friends would think about me if I just openly stated my faith in God. I worried too much about what other people would say about me, unlike some of the kids I know today, kids that I'm extremely proud of. But all of that really changed for me when I got my first job teaching middle school and high school English at Oil City. I was 22 years old, and I met kids whose home lives broke my heart, kids who were abused, kids who didn't have parents like I did, and kids with some of the most debilitating mental illnesses that I've ever seen. So over my 5 years at Oil City, I learned that being a teacher is more than delivering content. It's more than grading papers. It's more than assessing kids with tests. Teaching is about love and relationships. My time there taught me that when you actively love kids and build relationships with them, their possibilities are endless. And I share examples of a student I had when he was a 7th grader. His name was RJ. And this was like the first time in my career that I had a light bulb moment about what teaching really means. In 7th grade, RJ was the type of kid who sought attention all the time in negative ways. He would crawl on the floor, he would roll around on the floor, he'd scream in the middle of class, he would refuse to do work, he was just completely defiant, and I struggled with that as a first-year teacher. I didn't know how to respond to him. And so my reactions to RJ were typically negative and punitive. And so over the course of that year, I was working on my master's degree, and I had a number of classes on learning theory and connections with kids. And I read a lot about this psychological theory where your positive expectations for people generally come out in how you treat them. And when you expect positive things of people, they typically fulfill those positive things. But the opposite's also true. When you have negative expectations of yourself and of other people, generally you treat other people negatively, and negative things just continually cycle. And when I got my class roster over the summer and saw RJ's name on my 8th grade list, I was nervous at first, upset, because I thought, man, I'm going to have another year with RJ. But that class, that self-fulfilling prophecy, the positive expectations and negative expectations, really helped me to realize that I think what RJ needed was just a loving relationship and positive expectations. And so when RJ came back in 8th grade, I treated him completely differently. I treated him with love and respect. I gave him some flexibility in leadership roles, and RJ blossomed. And at that point, I finally realized that my job as a teacher was to love kids and to develop relationships with kids. And from that point on, that has been my total goal. I don't think that I'm really good at anything as a principal, except for loving kids and building relationships with them. And I've never read a textbook that prepared me to be a principal that talks about loving kids and building relationships with them, but I've never had an opportunity to disprove the theory that love and relationships are what matter most in schools. Some people call me naive because I expect good things of kids all the time. Some people call me naive because I don't always follow through with just a punitive punishment and walk on from that kid. Sometimes it takes me an entire year to figure out what's going on with that kid. But my goal is to show them love and to build a relationship with them, because I firmly believe that that's what corrects the misbehaviors. That's what gets the kids on track to succeed academically. But I learned that as a teacher at Oil City. I realized at that point that God had given me a gift, and it was real simple. It was leading kids and making them feel loved. And I still ascribe to that gift, and I believe in it every single day. And so when I had that in mind, that realization in mind, I wanted to do more with it. I realized that God had given me a gift, and so I wanted to take it beyond just my classroom. And I was blessed to have received a job at the Clarion Limestone School District, where I served as their high school principal and then eventually their superintendent. And I took my gifts of loving kids and leading kids and building relationships with them to Clarion Limestone, where that culture had already been established. So it was a perfect fit. The teachers were absolutely loving of kids. The kids and their families were absolutely loving and caring. And I took with me a motto that I'd learned. And if you walk through the high school and you walk past my office, you see a big sign plastered on my wall that my wife made for me that says RYFP. It stands for Reach Your Full Potential. And it's a mindset that I've shared with every single high school class thus far this year when we've had our class meetings. Reach your full potential, to me, this is what I've shared with kids in my life, has meant this. This is kind of what I shared with Sugar Creek during one of our first meetings. Every single day I try to reach my full potential in 3 specific areas of my life. And I learned this from a football coach when I was at Teal College. I try to reach my full potential in my walk with Jesus. And I struggle there every day. I fail, I sin, I mess up every single day. But still, I try to reach my full potential there. Secondly, in this order, I try to reach my full potential as a family man. And Felicia will tell you that I fail there every day too. I make mistakes, I make her angry, and I typically know that she's angry when she ignores me. But again, I do try to reach my full potential, secondly, as a family man. And then thirdly, I try to reach my full potential as a principal at the Karn City High School. And I have felt that if I have my reach my full potential philosophies in that order, good things typically happen for me. If my faith is in order, my family life is in order, my job life is in order. That doesn't mean that everything goes perfectly for me every single day. I still struggle, I still make mistakes, and I get things wrong sometimes. And when I was at Clarion Limestone, and this is that piece where I feel Jesus really worked in my life more than he ever had, I absolutely loved it there. We were rooted in a nice community. We had great neighbors. Like I said, I loved the kids at Clarion Limestone. I still keep in touch with them. And as a matter of fact, I felt like I made a difference there because the valedictorian last year used RYFP as his valedictorian speech. So I've made a real connection there. But there were some times later on when I became the superintendent that I struggled with completely. I was a 30-year-old superintendent, and I had no idea what the political side of schools looked like until I was in the middle of it. And I was consumed with anger all the time. I would come home and be paralyzed. I couldn't do anything. I didn't want to do anything because all I could think about was the anger I had for certain people at Clarion Limestone. And so I went through about a year of praying for God to do something in my life. I didn't know what the answer was, but I prayed every single day that He would deliver me somehow. He would show me the answer, that He would make me realize what it is that He wanted for me, because I had no idea what it was. I just knew that I was angry all the time, and it came out in how I treated other people. And so for years before this, Ed Conto would call me every time a position in Karn City came open and say, "Mike, you need to apply for this job. Mike, you need to apply for this job." But every time he called, I was starting something new, whether it was being first hired at Oil City to be a teacher, or hired at Clarion Limestone to be their principal. It always seemed that Karn City had an opening at that time, and right before that opening came available, I always took a job somewhere else, and so I didn't feel right telling the people who just employed me that, hey, I'm leaving, I'm going to Karn City. So I had to turn down Mr. Conto multiple times, until this very last time, when I was at Clarion Limestone, struggling mightily with anger and just hatred, honestly. I hated people. There were 3 people in particular that I absolutely hated. And I prayed for God to forgive me for my hatred and to deliver me. And so Ed called me one last time. It was on a Friday, and he said there's going to be a principal opening in Sugar Creek, and he said, "I want you to apply for it." I said, well, Ed, I had a great experience at Karn City. My wife's was a little different than mine, and we feel pretty good here. But it was at that point that I thought, maybe this is God telling me this is the answer to your prayer. Apply for this job. And Ed said to me, well, you know if it's the right thing if you pray about it and you get the job. And so I went to church that Sunday, and I was so anxious, and I don't have anxiety ever, but I went into church that day, and I was overcome with like this feeling of sickness. I didn't hear a word the pastor said that day because I prayed the entire church service that God would tell me whether or not He wanted me to apply for that job. So when we were walking out of church, I felt like a weight was completely lifted off my shoulders, because I had felt that God told me, Mike, you need to apply for this job. This job is for you. I've set this up for you. You've gone through this struggle for a reason. I want you to apply for it. So I applied for the job. I interviewed for the job and felt really good about it. And then my wife and I were watching the College Football National Championship, which is our favorite game of the year to watch. It was like 9:30 at night. It was an awesome game, and Eric Ritzert from Karn City called me to offer me the job. And at that very moment, that hatred I had was gone. The animosity I had towards those people was gone. Before that, anytime I thought about those people, I was overcome with anger. But at that moment, when I thought of those names, and when I think about them now, I'm not angry anymore. I don't hate them anymore. In fact, I see some of my faults in what happened in our relationship. But it was God who ultimately brought me back here. And He brought me back here for reasons other than making a difference in my community and making differences in the schools where I work. I absolutely love working with kids, but I think He also brought me back here because He knew that my grandpa was going to pass away during my time here. So I had an opportunity to be here during his final days. Sorry. I think He also knew that my dad was going to get sick. And luckily for Felicia and me, we were able to sell our house in Clarion within 2 days of having it on the market. So we had to come back and find a place to rent real quick. And a teacher at Sugar Creek, Deanne Pistorius, had a 3-bedroom apartment on her property that just so happened to be available. And she rented it to us for $200 a month. And we moved back. And again, that was a sign to me that God opened that door for us. It was a tiny place with 3 kids who were crazy. We had a good time there, but we needed more space. And so we ended up buying a house that happens to be 2 houses down from my parents. And shortly after moving in there, my dad was having some issues, and later on was ultimately diagnosed with colorectal and liver cancers. And I felt like we were given that house because I was going to have to help out in some capacity with my dad. And I mentioned earlier how my mom was my biggest Christian role model growing up. She still is. But over the course of the last 2 years, I realized my dad is also my biggest role model. I first realized that all the leadership traits that I had are exactly what my dad modeled. I worked with my dad at Standard Bank Glass in the summers in high school and in college. My dad managed a shipping and receiving department. And my dad led his colleagues with happiness, love, and humor, and relationships. And he had such a positive attitude every single day. Sometimes I stop myself in the middle of my job and I think, I'm exactly like my dad. I might not have admitted it when I was 16 or 17 because working at Standard Bank Glass with my dad and some of his colleagues was like working out west with guys who have terrible accents and say the worst things that you can imagine. But I realized that my dad's leadership is exactly the leadership that I employ today. But more recently, I've understood what it means to be totally Christ-like and to have faith because of my dad. When he was diagnosed with cancer, he didn't complain one time. Even today, when he's struggling to walk, and he's in his deepest moments, his darkest moments that he's ever been in, he doesn't complain. Don't get me wrong, I think everyone in our family totally hates what's going on with him. But he's modeled exactly what Christ did. Rather than complain and blame God, he's been prayerful. Rather than give up and worry about himself, he comforts us. Even in his darkest moments, I can't begin to explain what I've seen out of my dad during this struggle. Because like I said, he's never complained one time. He's been more prayerful than I've ever seen him. And he's there for us more than we're there for him. He's modeling for us what Jesus modeled on the cross. And I can't tell you enough how proud I am to call him my dad. He and my mom, through all of this, have never wavered in their faith. Like I said, they've never complained. They're stubborn. They don't ask for help. But they've never given up. Instead, they continue to be prayerful and exhibit the greatest faith of anyone I've ever known. My parents have taught me what it means to RYFP in my walk with Jesus. So like I said, when I was 12 years old, I followed Jesus because of everything my parents have taught me. Everything that they've done throughout my entire life, never seen my parents do anything wrong, has given me the opportunities I have today to be a leader for kids at Carn City, to be a leader for my colleagues, to have great faith even in the darkest times. It's all because of my parents. And as I continue on this journey, I pray that I can be the Christ-like example for my family that my parents have been for me. That's all I have.
Thank you for your testimony. I think we all feel blessed by that.